And we are live.
I see by the little light that we are live on YouTube. Good afternoon, everyone. This is the Vermont State Senate Committee on Institutions. Today is January 19th, 2022. I am your host for this afternoon's conversations, Joe Benning, the chair of the committee. I am a state senator from the Caledonia Orange District. We also have with us today a full committee list of Senator Mazza from Colchester Grand Isle, Senator Ingalls from Essex Orleans, Senator Parent from Franklin County, and Senator McCormick from Windsor County. Our conversation continues about secure facilities for justice-involved youth. I'd like to welcome everybody back. We've been having several days worth of conversation on this topic, and we're trying to just keep the conversation flowing. And I understand that all of you have been here before, but for the purpose of our general audience, who I did learn that there are some people actually out there in YouTube land who are watching us for reasons that I do not quite frankly understand, but they're out there. And so I'm going to say the same thing I always do, that when a person is testifying, the first thing we ask you to do is introduce yourself. Give us a little bit of a background about who you are and how you may fit into the picture. And should you be talking in a language that is perfectly understandable to both you and to us, if you say something that is possibly a red flag for somebody out there in YouTube land that might not understand what you're talking about, I may interrupt you and ask you to explain what that is. With that, we have several folks on the screen today to join us. Commissioner Brown, I have you down as the very first witness. Welcome back to the program, and we look forward to hearing your testimony this afternoon.
Thank you, Senator. It's good to be before your committee today. For the record, I'm Sean Brown, Commissioner for the Vermont Department for Children and Families. And historically, we have run a secure facility for juvenile justice involved youth. That facility was closed legislatively in October of 2020. And the legislature at that point also asked us to come back with a plan for the placement of secure youth, which we did later that fall and was approved by the legislature to move forward on a project in the town of Newberry with a provider, Beckett Family of Services, who runs programs across New England, on a piece of property they owned in the town of Newberry, a former bed and breakfast. And since that time, we had engaged the town of community through various public forums, answering questions through email and written questions, and then also communicating in private meetings, and then also through a series of public meetings for the permit applications, ones with the local development review board, and then also a separate one with the Act 250 local commission, where we're still awaiting a decision. And I think as known to this committee, the town development review board denied the permit, and Beckett and the state have both appealed that to the environmental court. And we're not able to comment substantively on that piece of it, but happy to answer questions about the process leading up to now. But also that delay is causing stress in the system of our care for kids with justice-involved youth. And as a result, we are engaged in alternate planning to make sure we have appropriate services and supports in place to serve those youth. And I'm happy to discuss those at a high level, given these were all recent developments. We're early in that process. But with me today, I also have our team, Erica Radke, who's the Deputy Commissioner for the Family Services Division, where much of this work occurs. And then also Katerina Lazias, who's a Senior Advisor to the Commissioner and who's been very involved in this work as well. I can just start off by saying there's been a lot of conversation in your committee and other committees in the legislature regarding the possible use of the former Windsor prison facility and whether short-term renovations could be made to the existing facilities or could another facility be relocated. I know we have worked with our buildings and general services department who believes the buildings are in such a state of disrepair that it would not make sense for the state to invest any money for a short-term option. However, they indicated that there is the possibility, and we'd be interested in pursuing a new built facility on that property, state owned and built on that property. And I've talked to BGS about starting that process and the planning to propose a facility there, or on another piece of state-owned property as well. We're open to that concept, and I would indicate Senator Benning, given the conversation happening in Senate Judiciary with the bill that's moving out of that committee into the Senate regarding raise the age and youthful offender, that there is a need to consider placement options for 18 and 19-year-olds and possibly 20 and 21-year-olds. And I think that planning would also incorporate that age range of emerging adult offenders as well. And that would be one of the pieces we would roll into any new project, would assuring that we could meet those needs and in a new facility as well. And we believe that that makes sense if that work's going to happen, that we would incorporate that work on the front end to move that forward as well.
Commissioner, can I just ask a quick question? With respect to that age cohort, do we have any idea how many people we'd be talking about?
Well, I checked periodically with the Department of Corrections, and so right now we have 18-year-olds who are not charged with Big 12 are in our system of care. Obviously, those that are 18 and above charged with Big 12s are treated as adults. However, there is some federal new legislation regarding the placement of 18 and 19-year-olds in adult facilities, and put some new requirements on the state. So I think it makes sense for the state to look at a facility that could meet those needs as well, given those federal requirements. And the last time I checked, the state had 4 18-year-olds charged as adults being held or in adult facilities. And that was earlier this fall. So it's a small number.
So from a brick and mortar perspective, we're probably looking at a building that is not even as big as Woodside.
Exactly. Probably someplace under the 30 bed capacity that Woodside had as well.
Sorry to interrupt you. I just felt like
and for your committee's refresher, the program we proposed moving forward with in Newberry was a 6-bed facility for serving under 18-year-olds needing secure residential treatment. Again, the need for that type of facility has really been reduced in Vermont as we've expanded our array of services in the community and able to meet the need in a wide variety of settings. However, there still is a need for a small number of youth and I would say emerging adults for a more secure setting to receive services. But it's not 30 beds, it's not 50 beds. I think we would want to do some work with our partners, work with the state's attorneys and sheriff's office to understand, what they see as the need. Also, work with the judiciary to see what they're seeing for the need on their end, and work with other partners on the front end if we designed a new facility like that, to make sure we're getting everyone's input on the front end and make sure we're building a facility that meets the state of Vermont's needs if we move in that direction.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. I think, given we're open to moving forward and we've had some initial conversations with BGS and moving in that direction, I think it raises some concerns on our end. We're sensitive to the position we're in Newberry with a community not wanting that type of facility in their community. Although Windsor did host a prison in the past, one of the concerns we just want to highlight in the report that was recently submitted to the legislature regarding the status of the use of that facility, in the town of Windsor expressed some concern about not wanting a prison or other type of AHS facility on that site. So I think there would be work we would want to do on the front end with the town of Windsor to work with them if a project was being proposed to move forward in that community. And given the community has expressed through a vote, through a budget process, and I think that information was submitted to your committee too. And so I just sensitive that issue still would be alive, the siting issue, even in Windsor. And I think that's why we would be open to any, looking at the siting on other state-owned property as well, just keeping our options open given those concerns and how they can delay a project as well. I think we do have a short-term need, just given the status of where we are and the impact that COVID is having on some of our programs, which is creating challenges across the board, but particularly we're seeing that with juvenile justice involved youth, although it's a very small number, it does create stress in our system. We have been working with Sheriff Mark Anderson, who has located a facility, believes that would meet our needs and is willing to work with the state and create a facility where we would have access to it long-term and medium and long-term with some sort of operational agreement as well, but also open to us bringing in another provider to provide services at that facility. If we needed to keep youth there longer than a few days or weeks, that's beyond their capacity. And so we have a provider who's interested. We have an agreement in principle with Sheriff Anderson. I believe he's scheduled to testify after we are this afternoon. And we believe that that's a very viable path forward in the short term that could meet our needs and also be available longer term to serve the needs of the department and our youth as well. Even if we stand up another facility, depending where it's located, sometimes we're transporting youth, to one area of the state and then back for arraignment or other court hearings several days later. And if we had access to that facility long-term, it could allow us the ability to limit how much we transport youth in the future. Just thinking ahead how we could strategically use a facility like that to meet our needs, even once we have another facility stood up longer term as well.
Okay, I have just a couple of questions. First, from a very high level, I know that the Newbury decision has been appealed. Can you tell me what court that is in?
That is in the environmental division of the Superior Court right now.
Do you have any idea where you are on the docket?
So I think we'll get a good sense of the path forward. There is a half-an-hour status conference, initial conference scheduled the week of, I think it's on Monday, the 24th. And so I think we'll have a good understanding of the path forward, at least initially for that case after that initial conference with the court.
Okay. I just want you to know personally that all of us are getting contacts from various quarters, and you've heard a lot of the testimony, I'm sure, in this committee. And that's as a result of some of the contacts that I've been getting, that people are anxiously awaiting some kind of a plan B situation. And I don't want to put you in a public position where you're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. But if I can get anything out of these committee discussions, just the idea that we're all concerned. We have several different functions of government, including the legislature itself, which is stuck in the COVID bind, if you will. And I think it's important that we all just keep talking to each other with recognition that we're all facing serious problems that have to be overcome. And hopefully these conversations will let the public know anyway that we are talking about things and not trying to hide. Commissioner, I did hear you talk about Mark Anderson coming on. He is going to be with us this afternoon. I don't know whether any formal discussions have taken place, but I'd be curious if there's anything afoot from your end of the conversation about whether that's a realistic possibility.
Yes, so we had a team who would be responsible for overseeing this type of facility and help designing the program that would be stood up in this facility and have an understanding, and have been involved in the design of the program in Newberry and the changes to that building to meet the needs of what we were going to use it for. Actually conducted a site visit to just get an initial assessment if that would be a viable facility, and we have very positive feedback from the team that visited it. And so we've had conversations with Sheriff Anderson similar to an agreement we have in another area of the state, which we use less frequently, just because during the winter months it's used as a shelter. But we have an agreement, a similar type agreement in place, and so we've agreed that would be the framework that we would move forward in, although it would have to be expanded and modified to meet this situation that we're working on. But we have agreement in principle to move forward on this project together. He has asked that we just keep the details high level, because he's managing the purchase of the property right now and the communications in the community regarding his use of the facility. And he can provide more details regarding that status to you earlier today. But we have agreement in principle to move forward. We have the resources within our current existing budget to move forward with this project and to fund its operation, given we were given funding to run a program in Newberry. And so those funds are available to meet the needs of youth and available for use in this project as well. And so there wouldn't be an ask of the legislature or any committee for funding for this work we're doing with this program we're standing up with Sheriff Anderson right now. We have the resources to move that forward.
How about around the rest of the state? We've heard various people talking about various places. I'm interested from your perspective how things are going around the rest of the state.
Well, we contract or have agreements with a wide variety of partners to meet the different needs of youth in terms of residential programs. Some of them provide a higher level of a staff secure program than others, depending on the needs of the youth. And what we're seeing across the board right now in our programs are the staffing challenges created by the pandemic that we're seeing in the healthcare field and other fields are impacting our programs as well. They're just having a hard time hiring and retaining staff, which has resulted in a reduction in the number of beds that they have available to serve our youth. I believe we have about a third of our bed capacity offline right now due to staffing challenges. We've been working with our providers to try to provide some financial resources and other resources to help maintain and increase that capacity right now. One thing that we've done in the short term, just given the immediate crisis we were facing due to workforce, and then when you add in the actual impact of the pandemic itself and staff test positive or youth test positive, and it really impacts the flow in and out of programs of our kids. We were able to amend an existing contract within the Agency of Human Services. That the lead on it is the Department of Disabilities, Aging, and Independent Living for traveling healthcare resources. We were able to amend that agreement to allow DCF to contract and hire traveling resources. And so we've been providing traveling resources to several programs in the state so that they can stay open and maintain their bed capacity. So we can ensure that our youth, whether they're juvenile justice involved youth or what we would call CHINS youth, children in care of need of supervision, come through the child welfare side, are able to access the services and resources they need. And so we have those resources in place in 2 programs. Then also, we also have other financial resources available to help our programs reduce any financial impact of not having the beds open and then having kids in them and drawing down revenue to support their programs. We have a process through our rate setting called extraordinary financial relief. And we've been providing extraordinary financial relief to several programs, and we have several requests pending right now. And that helps shore up programs financially. And so that is a piece of the work. And then also we have the ability to adjust rates prospectively so that we can avoid hopefully having programs end up in extraordinary financial relief, but also so that they can increase their wage structure so they can be more competitive in the labor market in Vermont right now. And so that by providing higher rates, they can pay higher wages so that help hire and retain staff. And so those are some of the other tools we're using right now to stabilize our system of care and make sure we have resources available to meet the needs.
So I understand all of this is a mixture of problems. We're lacking bed space, we're lacking personnel. I assume that means we are sometimes using out-of-state resources.
We have always used out-of-state resources within the state of Vermont. We have at any one time, at one point, probably half our kids that were in residential care were out of state. We have been trying to reduce that number over time. However, Vermont is such a small state right now that when you have kids with a very unique specialized need, it's very cost prohibitive, or we don't have the expertise to create that type of programming in Vermont. And so we would utilize programs in other states bigger states where they have programs created and availability to meet those needs. And so we're seeing the same impacts out of state that we're seeing in state right now. And many state programs in other states are limiting new admissions due to staffing concerns. For instance, one of the things I would point out for the committee is one of the tools we put in place with the closure of Woodside was a new agreement with the state of New Hampshire to send Vermont kids to the Sununu Youth Center. And we had spent one Vermont youth there since that agreement went in place in the fall of 2020. However, they're experiencing the same challenges now that we're experiencing in terms of staffing, and they're going through a similar process to try to beef up their staffing. And as a result, they've paused new admissions from other states. And so we're currently awaiting word when that might open up as a resource to the state of Vermont. But right now, they're not accepting new out-of-state admissions to the Sununu Center due to their staffing challenges as well.
Where is that located?
That's in, I believe, Concord, New Hampshire area.
Okay. Can you tell us about other out-of-state facilities and where they might be located, just so the public understands? I sometimes think of it this way: somebody who is living, for instance, in Brattleboro, who needs some service elsewhere, we use the term out of state and somebody thinks that's a terrible thing, but the reality is it's a heck of a lot closer to Burlington than Burlington. And I'm just trying to get an understanding of where the clientele is coming from in relation to what out-of-state services are out there.
Sure. I would say we can send youth to programs in like Tennessee, Florida. Those numbers are relatively small. We do, as you indicated, tend to utilize programs in other nearby states. And I would say one of those states is the state of New Hampshire. For instance, Beckett runs several programs in the state of New Hampshire where we send a large number of kids, some adventure-based programs where we send kids to. And so they have a large number of our kids in the state of their programs in New Hampshire, just given its proximity. And as you indicated, it may be closer for some of our Vermont kids to go to those programs if they're on the eastern side of the state than if we sent them to a program up in the northeast, up in the northwestern part of the state, or down in the southwestern part of the state where it's further away. We also have programs, I think in New York. I wish I had the list right in front of me. I don't have.
Commissioner.
Yes.
Earlier this month, we did share with Senate institutions and Senate Judiciary the list of all of our programs and the youth in those programs. I'm happy to resend to the committee if that's of interest. It does list both our in-state and out-of-state programs.
Katarina, I appreciate that offer. I believe that our committee assistants has plugged that into our documents. What I'm trying to do here today is give our listening audience an idea of where things are so that they try to get a full picture. And the next question I was going to ask might also play into your statement here. The most serious cases that we face when it comes to youth involved in the justice system, where are they normally sent to?
We did modify an in-state agreement to allow them to enhance the type of staffing so that they could accept a higher level of youth. And that was the CEOL programs known as the Depot Street programs in Bennington. So we modified their agreement, provided more financial resources, reduced the bed capacity in their program so that they could serve a higher level of youth than they historically have served. So that was one tool we put in place. And then the other tool for youth that needed even a little bit higher level, we had the Sununu program in place as well. And that was recently due to staffing. Although we'd only placed one Vermont youth there, and there is a bit of a process because it crosses an interstate line. There's a court process that you need to go through in terms of getting court approval to place a youth in an out-of-state facility. And that occurs for any youth unless there's an agreement in a CHIN's case. There needs to be a court process when you are seeking an out-of-state placement. So in general, it's a little bit more of a time involved process that could take a week to 2 weeks, depending on the court scheduling and the urgency of the matter to have that process play out. So currently, Depot has been meeting the needs of those Vermont youth. However, it is creating a strain on their program with the staffing challenges being created by COVID. And that's one of the programs we're utilizing traveling resources right now. And I think, and we believe this other program that we're working with Sheriff Anderson will be able to take over and meet that need for those higher level of youth that need that level of care. And so that's why we're focusing our energy and trying to work with the sheriff to stand that up as quickly as possible.
Okay. Katarina, I appreciate you commenting there. And if you find that we do not have those documents in our document list, feel free to send them back to Alex and I'll make sure that they're put into play. And as far as you and Erica are concerned, I don't want to leave you both hanging here. You're welcome to contribute anywhere you like. You've been very patiently listening through all of these conversations. And I'll float this question out to all three of you. It's 3 o'clock in the morning and you get a frantic phone call from somebody who's involved with an at-risk youth, and you do not have any immediate answers to placement as a result of facilities essentially tied up with other individuals. What is the process you go through in order to try to get some resolution?
So normally once something like that occurs after hours, whether it's at 8 p.m. or in the morning, we receive a call. Our centralized intake will receive a call saying that there's a youth needing service, either probably usually from a local police department who's picked that youth up. We will go out, have staff that go out on calls like that. They're on call. And the first piece, as you indicated, is we look to find a program. We try to keep capacity open in a program so that if something happens, we always try to leave a capacity in one of our programs to meet that immediate need. Then we also look to getting a transport, and that's been an area where we've had challenges since the start of the pandemic, and it ebbs and flows depending on the season, and you know, it's harder with the construction season and the sheriff's teams being utilized for construction details, or if, depending on the status of the virus. we've struggled with transport issues. And so one of the areas, just to point out for this committee, we have always used a contract with a company called YTA for when youth need to be transported to an out-of-state program. They've been a contracted partner. And so if we needed a youth transported from Vermont to a program in another state, they would provide that transportation. We are now, and Erica can probably speak to this a little bit more on the status of it, but given our struggles with transport, which is one of our big obstacles right now of moving kids in the state after hours, we've contracted YTA to become an in-state provider to be a supplement to our work with the local sheriffs as well, and just given the challenges they're having with staffing as well. And so we're contracting with YTA to provide the availability of 2 transport teams in the state, so that if we need a youth moved, because that has been one of the barriers as well. We have had and then the other component now with COVID is just is making sure we do rapid test. You know, we want to be careful we're not introducing virus to programs, and so we also need to make sure we do rapid tests and make sure they're available. And then also we've had some programs where we've had outbreaks which have limited it. And so for the most part, we've been able to meet the needs in place youth, but we have had a few situations, I believe 1, perhaps 2, since Woodside closed, where we have had a delay in opening up a program bed for various reasons, and a youth has had to stay longer than we would like in a police department. And that's the other reason it's important to move this program available with Sheriff Anderson, because it would be open 24 hours a day and available to take youth very quickly. So
I realize you spend a lot of time putting out fires, and we're all under the same gun with COVID especially. But let's look 10 years down the road from a brick and mortar standpoint. What is the solution to this situation that you would prefer to see, given your experience thus far? Are we looking at something that is a conglomeration of small facilities around the state, something larger? What direction are you thinking would be the best one to take?
Well, we do need a secure facility. In terms of its focus and size, I think would depend on how many we would need. We believe like the Newberry facility would meet the needs well of youth under 18 and the numbers we have that would need that level of care at any one time. However, I think the new component to this conversation is raise the age and youthful offender and the federal changes. And I think you know, the planning that we need to move forward on I don't want to call it a plan B, but I think, you know, there's an acknowledgement that we have this process here. The outcome is still uncertain with the program with Newberry. So it's important that we have a parallel track going for another facility, and we're happy to move that forward. So I think the vision is that we have facilities in place to meet all of the needs of our justice involved youth and emerging adults, because I think as we continue to evolve in our juvenile justice work and recognizing the brain science and the development of brains and trying to work with those age offenders, it's important that we have the programs and services in place that we know now that some of our current systems don't serve well, like, you know, of moving 18 and 19-year-olds out of adult prisons, I think is good policy, and probably leads to better outcomes for those of youth as they mature and their brains fully develop, and that they can be successful members of our society and contribute as they age into adulthood.
And I would add that it's not so much in terms of the size of the program, but more the fact that the program fits the needs of each population, whether it be our youth population or juvenile justice related, or that population that's, you know, has a significant high-end, high acuity need, just that we're having a wide service array in the state to meet those needs so that we don't have to send as many children or youth out of state. So my 10-year plan would be that we have facilities that are appropriate here whenever possible so that the families can visit their loved ones easily and often as opposed to needing to travel far away.
So at some point in the past, a committee like this one made the decision to create Woodside. Is a Woodside style of campus something to look towards, or is it something to move away from?
I think it depends on the needs of the youth we're looking to serve. I think there are a number of youth who the rehabilitative approach, the treatment approach is the most appropriate avenue. But I still think if you talk to prosecutors in the state's attorneys and deputy state's attorneys, that there's a belief that there's still a need for a small detention-like facility as well. And so I think it's balancing those interests and determining what type of facility is most appropriate to meet those needs. I think in terms of a treatment facility, having it embedded in the community and trying to keep those kids engaged that way, it leads to better outcomes. However, if it's a more of a detention-orientated facility, it may, a model similar to what the old Woodside looked like, maybe a much better building might be the model as well. And I think that's the work we need to look at as we move forward with this new planning of a new facility. Is there a way to balance those interests, or do we need two smaller facilities that meet both needs?
So you've described it as a parallel path, Commissioner. I appreciate the fact, I've called it a plan B, but I very much appreciate the fact that we're on that journey. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Erica, I'm sorry I cut you off.
Oh, I was just going to say that it is important that we're looking at both of those communities, because sometimes we've been told when you're trying to treat more of a detention in a detention-like setting or more of a treatment-based setting, sometimes the two don't mix. So, to have the best outcomes possible. So we are trying to look broad in our approach. And to me, it's important that whichever population and whichever way we go, that it's trauma-informed overall, because it is really important that the youth are getting the treatment that they need in whatever population they are.
Appreciate that. Committee, I'm going to open it up for questions, comments. I don't see anybody chomping at the bit. Senator McCormick, you're muted.
No, I'm not. Thank you. It seems to me that with all I'm continuing the discussion that we were just having, that with virtually everybody who breaks the law, we got really three things we're trying to do. One is to keep the public safe from people who are a threat to them. But those people are probably going to be back on the street someday. So then that leads to the second part of the mission, which is rehabilitation, straightening people out. And finally, there is, it might sound vengeful, but I think most people have a sense that if you do bad stuff, there ought to be consequences for you for having done that you wouldn't want to have happen. And that, that'll teach them a lesson, kind of attitude. But I've got to admit, even a nice guy like me has that's part of the complex of reaction. So it seems to me with the young folks, the rehabilitation approach ought to be the primary one. If anyone is likely to be straightened out, it's someone who's young and less set in his or her ways. But how do you reconcile? This is a big question. How do you reconcile those three imperatives as we choose what to do with justice-involved young people? And I don't know who I'm asking. Whoever wants to answer.
Well, I'll start. I really appreciate how you laid that out, Senator, and that really does make a lot of sense to me. And how you approach it is particularly, I'm thinking in terms of the raise the age population, is trying, our whole point in keeping those emerging adults in our system as opposed to the DOC, that adult criminal system, is because we have those services in place to talk about giving back to the community, to making ends and making sure they recognize where they've gone wrong and how they can turn it around. So that's one part of it, along with all the other probation monitoring and those things that are supposed to help them get onto a productive adulthood. And that is along with, what we were talking about in terms of more of a detention setting. So it all works in lockstep. And it's just a matter of bringing in the appropriate services to make sure that they do understand that what they've done is unacceptable.
Appreciate that comment. I've been a criminal defense attorney now for 38 years. And there are many folks who have a mindset that the raise the age effort is something that is a mistake. But as Senator McCormick alluded to, some folks who desire to teach kids a lesson, we've taught them a great lesson. Some of the people I was representing back in the 1980s, I'm still representing in the 2020s because the lesson we taught them was an absolute disaster. Trying to minimize repetitive criminal activity is the hope and effort of that raise the age situation. And it sounds counterintuitive to many people, but the bottom line is I think there's still a chance to get people rehabilitated before they enter into literally a lifetime of criminogenic behavior. Other questions, comments? Well, I thank the three of you for coming to join us today with Senate Institutions. I know you have a whole lot on your plate. We appreciate all the conversations going forward. Call it a parallel path or a plan B, but I'm hoping the same conversation is taking place with our counterparts in the House because they'll be in control of the vehicle that we may be able to bring some solutions to this, that being the capital bill for a while. And we're not going to get it, but we like to stay ahead of the conversation. So that's why we brought you here today. With that, thank you very much for coming. Alex, I'm going to ask if we have Captain Anderson with us yet.
He has not arrived yet. I did let him know that we're running a little early, so hopefully he'll be here momentarily.
With that, committee, I think we're going to take a 10-minute break. If you could all be back here, let's call it, 2:20. Let's bring it to 2:20. If you could come back on screen, we'll pick things up from there.
Thank you.
Thanks again.
I'm going to
Thank you for
pause
your
the
time.
live stream while we're on break.
Okay.